Okay.
I just can't take the heat.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before we start our regular agenda, there's a presentation by the New York City Economic Development Corporation on the latest progress on the Lower Concourse North rezoning. Here to present from EDC is Cecilia Kushner.
Good afternoon, Chair Lago. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to come in front of you again. Last time I came to talk about the Lower Concourse North rezoning was in August at the time of the CPC hearing. In September 22nd, we announced that Bronx Point, a team from L&M and Type A projects, was selected by New York City Economic Development Corporation for developing on the Lower Concourse North site. And since then, we've received the City Council Planning Subcommittee vote on October 10th, City Council Land Use Subcommittee on October 11th, and we are scheduled for a stated meeting tomorrow at the City Council for final ULUP approval on this project. So we're really excited to come in front of you with both an imminent City Council vote as well as a selected developer. So I'm going to do my best to present the project on behalf of the development team. Some members of the team are also here in the audience if you have more specific questions. So the project is a joint venture partnership between L&M Development Partner and Type A Projects, which is a woman-owned emerging developer that is known for their work on schools, mainly school buildings in New York City. They also have a key partner, which is called Bronx Works, which is a non-for-profit association that does a lot of job training and overall service to the community in the South Bronx, and Bronx Works is a key partner to them in the project. To remind you all of the RFEI objectives, the RFEI was put on the street in July of 2016 for 5-acre sites in the South Bronx that we call Lower Concourse North. So the objective of the RFEI were publicly accessible open space, waterfront and street life enlivening, neighborhood enhancing project. We wanted mixed use and mixed income, a lot of job opportunities on the site, and something that's always really important to us in RFEIs and RFP at EDC, we want a project that's actually feasible, financeable, and that can be implemented. So Bronx Point came back with a very attractive proposal that met all of the objectives that the city and New York City Economic Development Corporation had set for the site, with welcoming active street life and waterfront activation, a lot of mix of uses, including a lot of uses that are very Bronx specific, with cultural organization really becoming anchors for the site. A lot of affordable housing, and I'll walk you through the precise affordable housing program for the site, and a realistic plan for execution. So just as a reminder, these are the current conditions on Lower Concourse North. We're dealing with a 5-acre waterfront site that has been vacant for more than a decade, along the waterfront with the CSX line along the Harlem River. So this is a view that is taken from the bridge looking into Mill Pond Park, which is an existing open space right to the north. And these are a series of shots taken towards the Major Deegan and onto the site. So the key features of the Bronx Point proposal offered up to 1,400 residential units and approximately 150,000 square feet of community and commercial space with a publicly accessible open space that included a very significant extension of the Mill Pond Park open space into our site. The first phase of the project is really the largest one and the most meaningful one in terms of commercial development and affordable housing, with about 600 units of permanently affordable housing in the first phase, as well as a lot of educational, commercial, and community facility, including a state-of-the-art movie theater and a really large cultural anchor that we're really excited about, the city and the development team, which is the Universal Hip Hop Museum. So just a reminder, we have a site that's incredibly well accessible via transit, both from the Manhattan side and the Bronx side. So we're really talking here about transit-oriented development as well as waterfront redevelopment. Because of the importance of open space and really extending the Mill Pond Park onto our site, the design and the site plan that the team has begun to think through were really centered around the open space and view corridors from the community, from the upland into the Harlem River. So really trying to minimizing the footprint of the building to maximize the amount of open space. I just want to say that like all the drawings that are being shown are very illustrative right now. The team put together a proposal for the purpose of the RFEI response, and then they will need to finalize design in the next year coming for a certification here in front of the CPC, as well as PDC approval, FDNY, DOT, parks. So there's a lot of details of design that will continue to be refined and finalized between now and the next year. This is just a section of phase 1 to give you a sense of all the complexity of the site, where you have the major dig-in here, the Harlem River right there, and you just see how the commercial space and community facility space is being placed in like a podium at the bottom of the building that both allow to activate the open space and create a reason for people to come to the site and make the site a true destination to what's in the base, but also the open space and the river as well, and making sure that residential space began higher up in the building so that we don't have residential units that are like right across from the dig-in. So we have a very complex site with a lot of different elements to play around, and the team was very creative in coming up with design that works on all fronts. So this is just another example that shows how the phase 1 building responds to the special district requirements, because we had a text amendment as part of our application. So you can see how the shore public walkway elements, and we're really trying again to minimize the footprint of the building on the site so as to maximize the amount of open space, and really using the special district regulation, and we've been working really closely with the Bronx office at City Planning on them to create a building that provides diversity, but also again is responsive to very complex contexts with the dig-in, the bridge, the river, and Mill Pond Park. This is an illustrative plan of the 2 buildings. This is phase 1, and then phase 2 within the site, and again the connection to Mill Pond Park, the shore public walkway, and the 2 buildings here, as well as the public plaza. And this is a ground floor view that shows the extensive amount of community facility space and commercial space that would be on the base of the building. There will be community engagement on design. This is something that EDC committed to. This is also something that the development team is really excited about. The landscape architect is Marvel Architects. They were the company that actually designed Mill Pond Park that's really adjacent to our park. So they really know best how to make sure that the development and the open space in the development really work seamlessly with the existing condition and the park especially. This is just an illustration that shows the extent of Mill Pond Park. Today you have the tennis courts that are under a bubble, and the bubble will be removed in the coming time. And this is the existing Mill Pond Park, and this is the extent of our site here. So really, truly seamless connection between Mill Pond Park and our site. The goal of the team is to make sure that, because we will have a variety of open space, from some that are more kind of urban, if you will, under the dig-in, to some that really truly respond to the context of the Harlem River and Mill Pond Park, that there is variety in experience, and that programming be part of this. This integration of programming into the design will be an integral part of the community process that Marvel Architects and the development team will do. But these are just examples that they picked up in New York City of spaces that they think are interesting and can bring some element to our site as well. A little bit more on programming. One of the things that they thought was interesting is the opportunity, the potential to actually have, in addition to the plaza under the highway, kind of terrace sitting and public performance space that would be like on the base of the building, but again, making sure that the uses on the ground floor actually are accessible to the folks that are in the park, and making sure that we connect the whole as one destination. They've done a lot of extensive outreach to existing organizations that do a lot of really interesting work on environmental issues and ecology in the Bronx, and want to make sure that the ground floor spaces are programmed with uses that would be attractive and appropriate, especially for young kids in the Bronx, to make sure that this site is one where one can learn about the ecology of the Harlem River and open space in general. So they're looking to work with the Billion Oyster Project, the Bronx Children's Museum, and City Science as part of this project. One of the two anchors on the site will be a large-scale movie theater. This is something that is seriously lacking in the South Bronx. There are very few places where folks can go and watch a movie, and we thought this is a really important use, especially as facing the Deegan, where it's really hard to make any kind of retail or commercial space attractive because of the location of the design. A movie theater really can do that really well. And then one of the really important anchor of the project is also the Universal Hip Hop Museum. So this is an organization who's really trying to find a home and a permanent home for quite some time in New York. This is a unique opportunity for them to have a site that is not only kind of a great site in general, but also one that is located in the South Bronx, in like the place of birth of hip hop. And so they really see that as a major anchor to the project and to the development. So this is just a couple of slides about the hip hop museum, the Universal Hip Hop Museum, and their vision for the type of programming that they will actually bring. On affordable housing, our goal through the RFEI was always to maximize the amount of affordable housing on the site. The development will be done in two phases. Phase one will have approximately 600 units. Half of these units will be large family units, 2 3-bedroom apartments. The first phase is permanently affordable and will be serving families between 30 to 130% of AMI. And you can see the exact AMI breakdown on the slide there. The phase two will have the remainder of the units on the site, so it's about 445 units. Our goal here is to continue to maximize units at the deepest level of affordability. That second phase is much later in the future, though it will only commence once phase one has been completed. But we're committing as well to the deepest levels of affordability, with 20% at 30% of AMI, 30% between 60, as well as minimizing units that would be above 130% of AMI. The team is committed to design and sustainability. We're partly in the floodplain, so all resiliency measures, Appendix G, will have to be taken into account. And the fact that we can have commercial on the ground floor, as well as stepping up with the Esplanade, offer opportunities in design. And the project will also be seeking LEED Gold certification or Enterprise Green Community. And finally, this is a large project that has the opportunity to create a significant amount of construction job, as well as a significant amount of permanent job in the commercial and the residential portion. And there is a 35% target participation goal on MWBE, which is something the team is really proud of. And the project will also have to go through higher NYC. In addition, the development team is committed to work with BronxWorks. BronxWorks' main job is to make sure that folks in the ground in the South Bronx are able to actually get to good jobs in the neighborhood and are trained to be able to seek these jobs. So they will be doing ongoing kind of workforce development to make sure that the project is open to all. So that's it. Thanks again for the opportunity. Happy to take any questions.
And I wanted to just reiterate something that Cecilia had said. As you'll recall, this is coming back for chair certification, and I committed to bring the project back to the commission. This isn't part of that formal process because the design at this point is conceptual, but I thought it made sense, since we were so engaged with the project, to get a first look. I had the advantage of having seen it ahead of time, and so I think that was part of the confidence with which I brought it to the commission, knowing how rich the program was. And so now, Vice Chair Knuckles.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Cecilia. I just wanted to clarify, Marvel is the landscape architect?
That's right.
So the design or designer, or ultimate designer of the building
S9. S9 is everyone shouting to me, which I can repeat to you. S9.
So that's the architect
That's
for
right,
the,
for the development.
for the development?
That's right.
Okay,
That's right.
thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Delos.
Hi, thanks for bringing this back. Looks like an exciting project. I'm trying to remember just a couple technical things, and perhaps this will be, come back when it's more fully designed, but what the setback is from the highway of the actual residential buildings, and I'm trying to remember if our text addressed that at
Yeah,
all.
it does. I can't remember on top of my head,
Okay.
but it's both. It's distance from the highway, which I don't believe is necessarily part of the special district. It's like related to a state DOT easement and like how
Mhm. Oh,
close
that's right, that's right.
development can be close to the highway. And then the special district text allowed for the commercial base to be at a higher level so that we don't have residential units facing the highway.
Okay, okay, great. And if I may, and does the text that we pass speak to the signage facing the highway at all? And whether or not it can be moving or illuminated or anything?
No,
like
it does not.
Okay. I can imagine, once it comes back, it might have, I can see that being of concern.
Sure, sure.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi.
Hi.
I just wanted, I was interested in the commercial and community space and, sort of trying to recall some issues that we had dealt with. Right now, I'm interested in the 150,000 square feet. Does that include the museum?
It does.
Is that, and what's the size of the anticipated museum? How much do they?
So currently it's anticipated to be about 50,000 square feet, but that's the maximum size. It could be as low as 15,000 square feet. The museum is in the process of fundraising. They need kind of capital money to kind of do the outfitting. And so based on the level of fundraising at the time of closing, like that would really be the moment where like a final size is determined. But they can go as much as 57,000.
And the food and beverage mart and the
The
market hall, the movie theater.
So the movie theater, I think, is about, let me double check. But the movie theater and the museum are the two really big anchors. So the movie theater is about 38,000 square feet. Retail is about 12,500 square feet, and the rest is community facility use, which is about 7,500.
Okay, yeah, I was trying to get at the balance
Yeah,
between
yeah,
the
yeah.
community
So
facility.
it's really two large cultural anchors, the hip hop museum, the movie theater, then retail, but at a much lower scale.
But the retail is mostly food and
That's right,
beverage.
correct. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not soft goods at this
No,
point
that's right.
anticipated. So across the street, we still have the soft goods.
That's right, exactly, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Arfon.
Thank you. It is really exciting. I'm sure we all appreciate that we have this preview. And since there hasn't been a design formally proposed, I would just hope, as I have expressed during the review process, that the access from Manhattan to draw people from East Harlem, which is in the process of a rezoning, to come across to the Bronx is really a great opportunity. And I would hope every opportunity would be taken to design it to make it friendly in that
Yeah,
regard.
yeah, absolutely.
Vice Chair Nichols.
Is it the aspiration of the museum to own its space, or will they be a tenant?
Tenant, right, or own? I mean, I can have like L&M come and respond, if you will. Yeah, do you want to come up, Jose?
Well, you can answer it. Just-
It's a ground lease under EDC, so,
Yeah.
but the notion is to contribute and have the nonprofit run the museum at a nominal cost. So it's really a.
That's right. So the city owns, yeah, sorry, so the city will ground lease the site to L&M and Type A, will then do a lease at a nominal price to the Hip Hop Museum.
Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Something happened here. Actually, I was going to ask a design question and then an affordable housing question, but this discussion of the lease, I think, answers my affordable housing question. So the terms of the ground lease, to what extent will that be a future mechanism for ensuring permanent affordability beyond the units required by MIH?
So the entire phase one is permanently affordable, meaning that the city is committing the ongoing housing subsidy that would allow for all of the units to continue to be permanent, at each ground lease term renewal.
Okay. So even beyond the units required under MIH?
Correct.
Okay.
MIH only requires that a certain amount of the units become permanently affordable. Here, we're saying the entire development will be permanently
Okay, and what's the term of years on the ground lease?
It's a 40-year ground lease that's renewable twice with smaller timeframes as
Okay.
the 40-year.
Okay, and it's EDC's expectations that the affordability requirements will carry through
Correct.
all of the
Yes.
renewals? Okay,
Yes, that's right. We've been working with HPD on that, and that's what we mean by permanent. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So on the design front, it looks, recognizing that it's preliminary, it looks like the images portray a ground level that is essentially transparent and porous. Is that the idea, that people will be able to move through the ground floor and over to the waterfront? I'm looking at this image.
I think the idea is that it would be clear to people that are in the parks that there are uses in the building that invite them to enter the building, and that these uses have some kind of visual connection to the park. I think it does not seem to, I don't think the intention is to show that people can actually go through these uses in the building in order to go from point A to point B on the site.
Okay. Although if it were achievable, it would be kind of wonderful, is if as you're walking down the sidewalk underneath the Deegan, which is kind of a dark and forbidding and very difficult place to design, if you have this glowing open thing through which you get glimpses of the waterfront beyond, would be really an enhancement. Notwithstanding the fact that there are good pathways around.
Around.
That's great.
Okay.
Assuming that phase one happens, on the kind of timetable you're describing, how long do you anticipate there would be a pause before phase two gets going?
So the kind of commitment and what we think is realistic is that phase one would be delivered in about 2022. And then phase two will have to begin about 3 years after the substantial completion of phase one.
So is there an interim open space landscaping plan for the footprint of phase two during the, as construction is completed on phase one, so that we just don't have a black hole?
Yeah, we had looked at it, and there's been conversation. Right now, it's not something that's contemplated.
Okay. Well, I would think that, to Commissioner Efron's point, if we want to create a successful development here, we need to make it attractive for folks to get there from all directions. And having something welcoming at that corner, even though it's a pending future development site, I think would be really important. And I also hope in the design that attention will be given as the southern side, the southern facade of phase one is developed, to know that it's going to relate well to an open condition
Yes.
before phase two gets
and then the
going,
building.
and
Yeah.
to whatever happens on phase two. Because
Yeah,
you want
absolutely.
that to not be a back alley, but
Yeah.
to be a welcoming pathway to the waterfront.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yes, Commissioner Marty.
Phase one anticipate completion of Mill Pond, not completion, the continuation of
Yeah.
Mill Pond
So-
Park, so that'll be the building and Mill Pond
So,
Park. So
yeah.
at least the northern half, northern three-quarters will have parkland.
That's right. Phase one is defined as the building of phase one, as well as the Mill Pond Park extension, and the waterfront esplanade, the public plaza under the Deegan. So phase two is really the pad of the building, which is a very small portion of the entire development project.
Well, thank you, Cecilia, and
Thank
we
you.
look forward to seeing you again with more fleshed-out design ideas.
Great, thank you.
Okay, moving on to our agenda. Today is Monday, October 16th, 2017, and the time is 1:28. A quorum is present. The first item on the agenda is a certification for a UDAP designation, disposition, and special permit in Manhattan Community District 10. Our presenter is Joseph Hennekins of the Manhattan office.
Hello. So this is a application by the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, HPD, asking that the CPC grant an Urban Development Action Area Project UDAP designation, approval, and disposition of city-owned property, and a special permit applying a maximum FAR of 6.5 to a nonprofit institution with sleeping accommodations at this site in order to facilitate the construction of a 12-story supportive housing development. So the project is located in Manhattan Community District 10 on West 127th Street between Frederick Douglass Boulevard and St. Nicholas Avenue. The majority of the site is zoned R7-2, with the exception of a small sliver on the west of the site, which is zoned R8, and a section to the east of the site, which is zoned R7-2, but with a C14 overlay. The development site is surrounded by 3 different zoning districts. To the west is R8, to the south and the east is R7-2, and to the north is R8A. In addition, there are 2 special districts nearby. 1 block south is the special 125th Street district, and 1.5 blocks to the west is a special mixed-use district. So the project area is composed of 6 tax lots, and they all have different ownership histories. Lot 36 is owned currently by DCAS, but HPD has a hold on the property and will acquire it prior to disposition. It has a 1-story vacant building on it right now. Lots 37, 38, and 40 are vacant lots owned by HPD. Lot 39 is a vacant lot owned by the Center for Urban Community Services, which is a nonprofit social service provider that operates more than a dozen transitional and supportive housing developments throughout Brooklyn, Manhattan, and the Bronx. And then Lot 41 is it's also owned by CUCS, and it's currently occupied by 2 4-story buildings that right now house a transitional residence for homeless adults who do not use the traditional shelter system. So Lot 36 was part of a prior disposition in 1996, which was disapproved by City Council, and lots 36, 37, and 38, these 3, were part of a prior disposition of a whole bunch of Harlem lots that was approved by City Council in 2001, but the lots were never conveyed to a new owner. And HBD is currently seeking disposition approval for all 4 of the city-owned lots, 36, 37, 38, and 40. So the project area is surrounded by buildings of various scales. Across West 127th Street is a 11-story residential building constructed in 2009. To the east is the Greater Zion Hill Baptist Church, and to the west is a 1-story vacant building, which you can sort of barely see there, plus a vacant lot. And then the rest of the block is a mix of 5 to 7-story residential buildings, vacant lots, and some community garden. So the larger surrounding area is also diverse in terms of building form, and it has a mix of residential, institutional, and commercial uses. A variety of shopping and entertainment options are located a block and a half south on West 125th Street, including Harlem USA Mall and the Apollo Theater. Democracy Prep Charter School is about a block east. The St. Nicholas houses, which is a large NYCHA campus of 13 14-story buildings, is located here to the northeast. St. Nicholas Park is located 2 blocks to the north. And the area is well served by transit. You might have seen in the previous picture, there's actually a subway entrance to the ACBD trains right on the corner, a few feet from the project area, plus numerous uptown, downtown, crosstown, and Bronx-bound buses. So if granted approval, HPD proposes to convey the city-owned parcels to CUCS, which would then construct a new 12-story supportive and affordable housing building on the site. The development would have rear setbacks of 30 feet in the front and 30 feet in the back and 15 feet in the front, in compliance with setback restrictions in R7-2 and R8 districts. The rear yard would be landscaped for use by the residents, and there would also, the first floor would also contain residential entry, some social service offices, and some residences. Then the 2nd through the 11th floors would be entirely residential. The 12th floor would be residential, but slightly smaller than the preceding floors, and it would have a rooftop garden that would be accessible to residents. So the development in total would include 117 units. 34 units would be reserved for homeless adults with persistent mental health issues. 36 units would be reserved for homeless families with a head of household with mental health or chemical addiction issues. 46 units would be affordable for families and individuals at 60% of AMI. And 1 unit would be for the live-in superintendent. And facility would be manned 24/7 by CUCS skilled social service professionals. And it would include amenities including a fitness room, a laundry facility, lounge, and community room. And it would rise to 119 feet 2 inches, not including bulkhead. And it would adhere to the required sky exposure plane. So the overall zoning floor area of the building would be approximately 97,000 square feet, and it would have a floor area ratio of 6.5. 6.5 is the allowable FAR for most types of community facility uses in R72 and R8 districts, but nonprofit institutions with sleeping accommodations, which this would be, are subject to a lower FAR. It's 3.55 in R72 and 6.02 in R8. Which is equivalent to the residential FAR in those districts. So therefore, the applicant, HPD, is requesting a special permit to apply an FAR of up to 6.5 to a nonprofit institution with sleeping accommodations at this site. The special permit is subject to 3 conditions, one of which is sort of access to light and air, the second of which is provision of adequate services, and the third of which is adequate streets to accommodate the traffic. And then in addition, the applicant is requesting a UDAP designation, approval, and disposition of the 4 city-owned lots. And doing so would facilitate the construction of a 117-unit supportive and affordable housing building with attendant social services. Questions?
Commissioners. Vice Chair Knuckles.
Thank you, Joseph. Do you know whether or not CUCS manages other buildings or properties in Harlem or Upper Manhattan?
Yeah, like I said, they own more than a dozen different facilities. I think there is a few others in Upper Manhattan. There's a few in the Bronx and a few in Brooklyn. In addition to the one that is going to be replaced by this new building.
Okay, if possible, could you provide
Yes,
us with that information as it pertains to Upper Manhattan?
Yeah, certainly.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Efron.
Will CUCS plan to have non-residents participate in their social service programming?
Yeah, they said that all of the services would be accessible to residents of the building, period, both the residents who are formerly homeless and the residents.
My question is whether non-residents would be eligible for the programming.
That I don't know, and I can get back to you about that.
Thank you. Trying to figure out if it's for the entire community or just their residents. So.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Deleuze.
I'm somewhat familiar with CUCS's programs, having worked there more than 15 years ago. And they run dozens of programs up in Washington Heights and Harlem on the social service side, on the housing side. I'm less familiar because a lot of that came after I left, but they are top-notch.
Other questions or comments? Okay, then this application is certified.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joseph. Item number 2, page 29, is a certification for a zoning map and zoning text amendments, UDAP designation and disposition in Manhattan Community District 7. The presenter is Nabila Malik of the Manhattan office. Okay.
bulky computer.
We have the handout.
Success.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is an application by the Department of Housing Preservation and Development and the West Side Federation for Senior and Supportive Housing, known as WSFISH, to facilitate the construction of 2 new 11-story buildings consisting of affordable and supportive housing and community facility uses on West 108th Street in Manhattan Valley and CD7. WSFISH is a 40-year-old community-based nonprofit with a mission to provide safe and affordable housing with supportive services for seniors with around 25 sites in Manhattan and the Bronx. The proposed actions include a zoning map amendment to change a portion of the project area from R8B to R8A, a zoning text amendment to Appendix F of the zoning resolution to map a mandatory inclusionary housing area, and the approval of an urban development action area project and disposition of city-owned property. Manhattan Valley, bounded by West 110th, West 96th, Central Park, and Broadway, is a neighborhood within the borough's larger Upper West Side, currently zoned R8, R8A, R8B, and R72, with commercial overlays along the avenues. So this is Amsterdam Avenue here and Columbus Avenue here. The development site is in red, and across from it, the Booker T. Washington Middle School and playground on West 108th Street there. And Morningside Park and the Cathedral of St. John the Divine are 2 blocks north. The site is served by the 1 subway line on Broadway and 110th, and the B and C lines on Central Park West and 110th. The project area includes Block 1863, lots 5, 10, 13, 17, and 26, is bounded by Amsterdam to the west, Columbus to the east, and West 108th to the south. It's currently part of a larger R8B zoning district and has a total lot area of about 60,000 square feet. The disposition under the UDAP involves lots 5, 13, and 26, which are HPD-owned public parking garages, with a total of 675 spaces. And again, here's the Booker T. Washington Middle School and playground.
Nabila, if you could use the pointer because we're being
I'm sorry.
recorded. Thank you.
So here is the Booker T. Washington Middle School and playground. That's the Avalon Residential Tower, 18 stories. And the rest of the site is surrounded by 5-story residential units. Lot 5, about 46,000 square feet, is a 4-story garage with 250 spaces. Lot 13, about 45,000 square feet, is a 5-story garage with 300 spaces. And Lot 26, about 22,000 square feet, is a 3-story garage with 125 spaces. All 3 garages within the project area are active pursuant to month-to-month lease agreements between the garage operators and the city. Lot 10 is the WSFISH-owned 5-story Valley Lodge shelter, which provides transitional housing for homeless seniors with 92 shelter beds. And Lot 17 is occupied by the Annabelle Aviles Playground. Although the lot is part of the rezoning area, it is a mapped public park under the sole jurisdiction of DPR and not subject to zoning regulation. It's also not proposed for any redevelopment. So lots 5, 10, 13, and 26 constitute the development site as a result of the proposed actions. Lots 5, 10, and 13 make up the site of proposed Building 1, the western building, and Lot 26 is the site for the proposed Building 2, the eastern building. So these buildings would replace the existing garages and Valley Lodge shelter. So this is Garage 1 and Valley Lodge looking northeast on West 108th, and again, Garage 1 looking northwest on West 108th. This is looking east on West 108th with Garage 2 and the Booker T. Washington playground here. And looking northeast with the Annabelle Aviles playground here and Garage 3. And then looking west, Garage 3 here and the Booker T. Washington Middle School right here. The project area being rezoned is outlined with the dotted lines. Under the existing R8B zoning, each zoning lot has a permitted maximum FAR of 4.0 for residential and community facility uses. The applicant believes that under the R8A, the proposed project will be able to achieve a development that provides more affordable housing while keeping it within context. The R8A district allows for a maximum 6.5 community facility FAR and 7.2 residential FAR with MIH. So the proposed R8A zoning would allow the applicant to build their proposed buildings at 5.3 FAR with total heights between 110 to 115 feet. The bulk of development for this particular project will be limited by HPD through the restrictions in the land disposition agreement to 5.3 FAR for both buildings. The proposed project would consist of 2 buildings. Both the western building and the eastern building have frontage on West 108th Street. The development is designed to provide approximately 277 total units of affordable and supportive housing, along with shelter facilities and office space for support services. The western building, planned for construction shortly after disposition, would specifically contain 194 affordable housing units, including 115 supportive senior housing units and 79 affordable family and single housing units, plus a superintendent's unit. Additionally, the development would upgrade the Valley Lodge shelter from 92 beds to 110 beds with added community events and dining spaces on the ground floor and an office suite for Wisfish support services. While the upgraded Valley Lodge is not a new shelter, its enlargement exceeds 25% and therefore qualifies for a fair share analysis, which was conducted by the Department of Homeless Services in conjunction with this application. Wisfish has acquired a site on the Upper West Side to temporarily house the Valley Lodge shelter during construction of the western building. The building's street wall would be entirely within 15 feet of the street line and a total building height of 11 stories at approximately 115 feet with a total area of about 160,000 square feet. So here is the community events and dining space and the Wisfish support services. The building also includes replacement parking and office space for the Central Park Medical Unit, which is a volunteer ambulance unit that currently parks ambulances within the existing garages overnight. So the replacement parking for 3 ambulances will be located here. The western building would also contain restrooms and a storage area for the adjacent Annabelle Aviles playground to be maintained by DPR. There will be a small gate for separate entry to the restrooms. The eastern building would not be constructed until 5 years after construction begins on the western building, and it would provide a maximum of 81 units of senior supportive housing plus 1 superintendent's unit. The building would have a floor area of around 40,000 square feet, and the street wall would be at the street line with a 26-foot setback and a total of 11 stories at around 110 feet. As the lead agency for the environmental review, HPD released a notice of completion for the draft environmental impact statement on October 13th. The draft EIS identified a potential significant adverse impact for noise from construction associated with the proposed project. And the potential for mitigation measures will be explored between the draft EIS and the final EIS. Based on the proposed development, the actions include a zoning map amendment to change a portion of the project area from R8B to R8A, since under the current R8B zoning, residential and community facility uses are capped at 4.0 FAR. A zoning text amendment to Appendix F to map and MIH area for option 2, and the approval of a UDAP and disposition of city-owned property. Thank you.
Questions from commissioners? Commissioner Delauze.
First, I just want to say this project is much needed. And you answered one of my questions when you talked about where the Valley Lodge residents will go during construction. It's a very well-regarded shelter. I guess the question I have, one is about the 5-year delay between the eastern and western construction. I'm assuming that might be tied to the DEIS findings. I'm just wondering if there's more there. I mean, that's, in my mind, a delay of provision of affordable supportive housing to needed people, that people need. And then the other question I have is, you know, given the change in heights, what level of discussion there may have already been with the local community? I appreciate that HPD plans to limit through the regulatory process, but I'm just wondering if any of this was highlighted with the community in advance.
Yeah, so in regards to in regards to that question, the WSFISH and HPD have met with the community, and part of the reason for capping it at 5.3 FAR is to keep the buildings within context, and it was sort of an unofficial dialogue with the community of maintaining that.
Helpful.
And then, sorry, could you
The
repeat your
5-year delay.
Yeah, so I don't have the exact details on that. I know that it's sort of been planned to be constructed in phases, and hence the second building would be constructed 5 years later, and during that time, that parking garage would remain active until it was disposed of.
Yes, Commissioner Levin.
I actually have 3 questions in 3 categories, if that's not too piggy. One is an MIH question, one is a design question, and then I think we have to ask about parking. It's obviously an important element of the current situation there. So on the MIH question, if the floor area ratio is being limited to 5.3, and the regulatory agreement limits, you know, describes the kind of development that will occur here, why are we mapping MIH for residential use that's prohibited by the regulatory agreement?
So I can get back to you on that. I mean, the MIH is being mapped because both buildings will contain MIH affordable and supportive housing. But in terms of the relationship between that and it being capped, I can look into.
Yeah, no, I'm certainly mapping MIH is a good idea, but sort of curious whether this is a belt and suspenders sort of thing. Is the MIH intended for something in the future?
Right.
Do we need it now? Anyway, how do they get related?
Sure.
So,
I'll just note on this that we have seen applications before where it is for a use that feels like residential but falls into a different use group, and we map the MIH.
right,
sort of
but this one has the
against
added
the future.
benefit of the regulatory agreement, which locks everything down pretty well too, so.
We did that last month.
Better to do it twice than not at all. The design question, since this building, the height of this building will be quite a bit taller than the buildings, the row of 4 or 5-story buildings to the north. Curious to know when it comes back what the design treatment will be on the north elevation, because that will be exposed for quite a while and should be an attractive feature of the neighborhood. Then finally to parking. With 675 spaces currently there, I'm curious to know how many of them are being used, what the plan is, where people could find parking. I gather it may not technically rise to the level of a negative impact under seeker, but we might be in a situation which we see frequently where seeker kind of doesn't match common sense, and I can imagine that some of the people parking there might feel unhappy about this development, and so I think we have to have a open conversation about how you balance a neighborhood's need for parking with a neighborhood's need for this kind of housing, even if it's not a technical seeker-required conversation. But I expect the community is going to lead us through that conversation.
Right, exactly. And the draft EIS did project a shortfall of about 470 spaces on and off-street parking combined during the peak period. But like you said, because it's such a transit-accessible community, they found that only 8% of residents choose to drive to work, and hence it's not considered a significant adverse impact. So, but yes, this is a continued.
So stay tuned.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yes, Commissioner Efron.
Thanks. I appreciated the fair share analysis, and I imagine and hope that during the community review process, we will hear about Wisfish's success in the past in dealing with neighborhoods with both middle schools and playgrounds adjacent, and what the history has been, and they'll have a chance to share that with us, but it just seems to be worth noting. Thanks.
Other questions or comments? Okay, so this application is certified.
Moving on, item number 3, page 59, a certification for a special permit in Manhattan Community District 3. Our presenter is Xinyu Liang.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is a private application. The proposed development site is located at the corner of Allen Street and Grand Street within the Lower East Side of Manhattan Community District 3. The applicant, the Grand Associates LLC, is seeking approval of a special permit pursuant to zoning resolution section 74711 to modify the use regulations in order to allow the conversion of use group 6 office use to use group 2 residential use on 2nd through 4th floor, the expansion of existing 1st floor residential lobby for a new elevator and elevator lobby, and the construction of 6th floor addition above the existing 5th floor to be occupied by residential use. So the action will result in a total of 8 residential units, an increase of 7 units from the existing legal non-compliance units on the 5th floor. The subject building, formerly the Edward Reade and Son department store, was constructed in 1886 and was once the largest department store on the Lower East Side. In early 1930s, the Allen Street was widened. The building that was located at the southeast corner of Grand Street and Allen Street was demolished, making 66 Allen Street into a corner building. In 2012, the Landmarks Preservation Commission designated 2 Edward Reade and Son department store buildings, both the proposed development site, which is this one, and the adjoining sites at 65 Orchard Street, the pink buildings, as historic landmarks. Currently, some of the restoration works are underway or planned to start in the coming months. You can see in the buildings, in the photos here, so the buildings entirely covered by scaffolds. The applicant confirmed that all the construction works are all within the scope of work of certificate of properties and certificate of no effect issued by LPC and received permit from DOB. There's no work being undertaken in connection with the proposed change of use in the interior of the building. Based on the history of certificate of occupancy, over the past 130 years, this building has never been occupied by factory or manufacturing uses. The most certificate of occupancy issued in 1965 lists 1 apartment on the 5th floor. The project site is on a block bounded by Grand Street on the north, Allen Street on the west, High Street on the south, and Orchard Street on the east. The surrounding area is characterized by mixed-use residential buildings with ground floor commercial uses. Scattered around the area are a mix of manufactured uses, including commercial lofts and warehouses. The buildings in the 600-foot surrounding area are predominantly loft and tenement-style developments, generally built in early 1900s, with average heights of 3 to 6 stories. The proposed development site is on the southeast corner of Allen and Grand Street, situated within 662G zoning district. It is a commercial loft district outside the central business district with special regulations governing the conversion of non-residential space to residential use.
So that means that the residential use is not permitted unless the floor area in such building was occupied for residential use prior 1984. 662G district has a maximum commercial FAR of 6, a maximum residential FAR of 6.02, which is R8 equivalent. And this zoning district does not have a height limit. For height factor buildings, it cannot penetrate the sky's exposure plan, which begins at 85 feet. The lot area has about 3,000 square foot. It's improved with a 5-story, 60 foot, 10 inches tall building that rises without setback to the roof level. The building is underbuilt. The total floor area is about 15,700 square foot, about 4.91 FAR. On the ground floor, the building is currently occupied with retail use as well as a residential lobby. On the second, third, and fourth floor are occupied by multiple short-term office uses. And on the fifth floor is occupied by one legal non-compliance residential unit. The residential use on the fifth floor has been in place since at least 1965. The applicant is seeking a 74-711 special permit for only use waivers, including first, to expand the residential lobby on the first floor, to add elevator lobby for ADA accessibility, as the existing building does not have an elevator. So the light gray color here shows the use waiver locations. Second, the applicant is proposed to convert the office space on second, third, and fourth floor to residential use. And third, to add the sixth floor addition also to be occupied by residential use. The sixth floor addition will be set back approximately 13 feet 5 inches from the Grand Street straight line and about 21 feet 6 inches from the Allen Street straight line above the existing fifth floor rooftop. This enlarged portion of the building will contain about 749 square foot of floor area and will increase the height of the building from 60 feet to 72 feet at the roof level. The resulting new total floor area will be about 16,700 square foot, about 5.21 FAR. The source of the additional floor area will be from excess unused floor area as the building is currently underbuilt. The action will result in a total of 8 residential units, an increase of 7 units, which is about 10,730 square foot from the existing 1 legal unit on the 5th floor. There will be 2 units each on 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors, and the existing 5th floor unit will be divided into 2 units, one of which will be a duplex with a 6th floor addition, which you can see in this section here. The commercial, retail, and storage will remain in subcellar, cellar, and ground floor. To facilitate the proposed project, the applicant is seeking a 74-711 special permit to modify the use regulations, which restrict the residential conversion in 662G district. The special permit allows Commission to modify the use regulations for zoning lots containing a landmark designated by LPC or for zoning lots with existing buildings located within historic districts designated by LPC, provided that certain conditions and findings are met. Thank you.
Questions? Commissioner?
Does the department have statistics about Class B and Class C office space available in that immediate neighborhood? It seems to me that I would at least want to know whether the loss of that office space was something that we should be considering.
So currently there are 6 office units within 2nd to the 4th floors. One of the units is vacant, and the applicants mentioned that there are about 10 people working in that office, in that buildings, but I can definitely get back to you about the surrounding office uses.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Deleuze.
So I just want to confirm that the total increase in residential square footage is below 12,500 square feet, thereby not triggering MIA.
Yes, it will be 10,730 square foot.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay,
All right,
Another
thank you.
application certified.
Okay, moving on to item number 4, page 99, a certification for an acquisition for continued use as a child care center and senior center in Queens Community District 12. Our presenter is Stephen Everett from the Queens office.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. The Administration for Children's Services, the Department for the Aging, and the Department for Citywide Administrative Services are seeking acquisition of an existing building located at 12310 143rd Street in the South Jamaica neighborhood of Queens Community District 12. This would facilitate the continued operation of a child care center and senior center. ACS and DFTA have operated these two centers at this location since 1971, and a previous application was approved by the City Planning Commission in December of 1991 with a term of up to 20 years. That existing lease expired in November of 2013. The project area consists of Block 12039, Lot 44, with frontage on Rockaway Boulevard, 143rd Street, and 123rd Avenue. It's located in R5D and R3A zoning districts, established by the 2011 City Planning-sponsored South Jamaica rezoning, which amended the zoning map on all or portions of 530 blocks to protect the lower density character of surrounding neighborhoods, as well as allow for moderate increase of residential and commercial density along main corridors. Prior to 2011, the project area was mapped with an R32 district. Land uses in the surrounding area are primarily residential, characterized by single and two-family detached homes in the surrounding R3A and R31 districts. Rockaway Boulevard is a primary east-west corridor mapped in several locations with a C13 commercial overlay and characterized by a mix of residential, commercial, manufacturing, and community facility uses. The Omega Sci-Fi Early Childhood Education Center and Rockaway Boulevard Senior Center occupy the entire two-story privately owned building, including cellar and rooftop play area. The building comprises a total of approximately 36,228 square feet, including 29,721 square feet of interior space and 6,507 square feet of rooftop play area. Omega Sci-Fi Early Childhood Education Center's primary entrance, as shown here, is located on 123rd Avenue, and the child care facility occupies space on the second floor and the cellar. The center serves up to 82 children under a license from the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. And the children may attend the facility from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday and are transported to and from the center by their parents or guardians. The center provides services to the children, including a daily breakfast, lunch, and snack, supervised playtime and education using the creative curriculum to enhance the children's physical, cognitive, social, and emotional developments. The center is operated by 15 professional, paraprofessional, and support staff. The second floor is the primary child care facility space. It contains 3 classrooms, as well as commercial-grade kitchen, children's bathroom facilities, and a small library. This is the commercial-grade kitchen, again on the second floor. And the cellar level, which is shown here, contains multi-purpose classrooms and a large auditorium space, as well as a small kitchenette shown here on the left. The rooftop play area consists of approximately 6,507 square feet, accessed by 2 separate staircases, and is used by ACS. The Rockaway Boulevard Senior Center's primary entrance is located on 143rd Street, and the Senior Center occupies space on the first floor for accessibility purposes. It's open from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday, and the space includes administrative offices as well as a commercial-grade kitchen where staff serve an average of 50 breakfasts and 60 lunches to an average of 70 senior citizens per day. In total, the center is operated by a staff of 9. The senior center also includes recreational rooms. Shown here are a computer lab and game room, and Department of City Planning staff toured the facility on September 26th with ACS, DFTA, and program staff, and confirmed the facility is in a state of good repair. Again, to facilitate the continued operation of both the child care center and senior center, the applicants seek acquisition of this existing privately owned building. Thank you.
Questions from commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Efron.
This will not surprise you that I'm wondering whether, in fact, these spaces are sprinklered from the photos that you've shown us, which are clearer than the ones we've had. It looks as if the basement kitchen for the daycare center is sprinklered, but that the other 2 kitchens, including the one for the seniors are not. And I guess I'm wondering why, with the extensive scope of work that really seems to be replacing virtually every other system and does include a fire alarm system, which I know is required by law, why that extra consideration wouldn't be considered?
To my knowledge, it's because of the size of the facility that it's not required per building code, but I'll ask DCAS and DIFTA as well as ACS to be prepared to answer your question.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
No, I'm good, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Cirillo.
Just a question which is perhaps somewhat humorous. I want to acknowledge the receipt once again of the scope of work for these projects. Although I'm wondering that these are dated in 2016 and then the next one 2015. They are not indicated whether or not they are revised. So I'm not sure if there has been no revisions, or to solve the problem of getting redlined updates, we just eliminated revisions completely and just get the original scope of work.
Yeah, we found that the revisions tended to just be minor language changes, and it was more confusing
Okay.
to note the revisions, and so we thought the scope of work is what it is.
Fine.
And so that's how we'll be doing it going forward, because it was just engendering confusion without substance.
Okay, okay. So, and then I would assume, though, some of the simpler things that may have been on a scope of work from 2 years ago, and I didn't go through the substance of this particular one, but I could recall others in the past where there were broken windows at a date, of course, say 2 years ago. Is someone looking at those, I mean, big scopes of work like new HVAC and, you know, redoing the roof perhaps, or something like that? I can understand how it may take time to do that, but some of the things we've seen on scopes of work are potentially dangerous to those who are using the centers, whether they're children or seniors. And I just wonder, how does that get incorporated in the short term, as opposed to just being part of a long-term scope of work that we're seeing 2 years later?
Sure. So I can speak to the facilities that I've toured. There haven't been any hazardous conditions at any of the sites that I've seen. So to your point about broken windows, those kinds of maintenance and operation issues would be taken care of immediately.
Okay.
But the scopes of work are reviewed with very fine detail every time they are revised and sent to us. So by the time that we are left with the items that are in the scope for certification, it's typically the larger items that are more long-term maintenance issues.
Okay.
If you need more clarification, I can certainly get back to you.
No, my concern is that these documents just don't get prepared. I mean, I know we're not seeing them all from the start of the process either, so it's not just about what we're doing with the information, but perhaps a sister agency. So as long as there's someone looking at those things, obviously that brings me some comfort. I'm sure we all share the concern that hazardous conditions don't remain
Absolutely.
any longer than they
Absolutely.
exist at the moment. But I just, that was really the concern, even for asking about the redlined version of the revised, because the revised in the past still had those conditions on them, and it wasn't clear whether or not they had been sort of cured or not in the process.
I would note that that is part of the purpose of the site visit, so that city planning staff is out there on site and can, in making a statement that it is in a state of good repair, that would almost by definition obviate having a major hazardous condition.
Good.
In my time, I've only seen one application that we brought forward where the team was unable to say that the current condition was not in a state of good repair. You'll recall that one where it was all the
Sure.
more urgent to
Of course.
have the repairs made.
So is it a correct assumption that when site visits are done, you are already in possession of the original scope of work and are sort of following that in a way as a roadmap?
That's certainly been my experience.
Okay.
I believe we negotiate to receive those ahead of time so that we can review them and be prepared for any outstanding
Excellent.
issues, so that it's not just showing up on site and finding out what kind of state the building's in.
Excellent. So I guess that today is the final day I will ever raise the issue of the scope of work. But thank you so much, thank you.
I welcome Commissioner Efron's emphasis on sprinklering, your emphasis on hazardous conditions. I do think it's an important part of our
Thank you.
obligation.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Efron.
Chair Legault, I wonder if the delay on this particular one means that the signage on the outside, which I know is a special interest of yours, perhaps is lost in the scope of work because it's pretty bedraggled, but perhaps that's a more recent change.
Again, our urban design team is going to be coming forward at one of our November meetings, and we're in discussions with DCAS and ACS about changes going forward. At this point, we're still in developing the menu of options. We're also quite aware that in developing the menu of options, that cost is a factor, and I think that's something that we always need to balance. This is a program where, I know speaking for myself, safety issues triumph over design issues since we're dealing with fragile communities, but I do anticipate that we're going to continue to see applications that are well along that will not incorporate any of the design suggestions that we have. And this is a particularly tough building, given the bars on the window. I will note, I was pleased that on the childcare portion, although it's not as visible on the elder, there is welcoming signage. It doesn't vitiate the tough exterior of the building, but there is both a canopy and signage for the childcare center.
Okay.
Other questions or comments?
Right.
Okay, the application is certified.
Right. Moving on, item number 5, page 115, is a certification for an acquisition for continuing use as a child care center in Queens Community District 12. Again, our presenter is Stephen Everett from the Queens office.
The Administration for Children's Services and the Department of Citywide Administrative Services seek the acquisition of an existing building, this time located at 11015 164th Place in the South Jamaica neighborhood of Queens Community District 12 to facilitate the continued operation of a child care center. ACS and its predecessor agency, the Human Resources Administration, has operated a child care center at this location since 1972, and a previous application was approved by the City Planning Commission in June of 1994 with a term of up to 20 years. That existing lease expired in April of 2015. The project area consists of Block 10193, Lot 1, with frontage on 164th Place. It's located in R3A zoning district established by the 2011 Department of City Planning sponsored South Jamaica rezoning, which again amended the zoning map of all or portions of 530 blocks. Prior to 2011, the project area was mapped with an R32 district. Land uses in the surrounding area are primarily residential, characterized by single and two-family homes in the surrounding R3A district. 2 blocks west of the project area is Guy Brewer Boulevard, that's here, which is a primary north-south corridor. And in addition to residences along this corridor, additional land uses include local retail and houses of worship. The houses of worship are here. Those are the indicated in blue. All My Children Daycare 4, the child care facility occupies the entire one-story privately owned building, including cellar and rooftop play area. Comprises a total of approximately 27,070 square feet, including 20,600 square feet of interior space and 6,470 square feet of rooftop play area. The building's primary entrance is located on 164th Place, and a secondary egress from the first floor leads to an at-grade outdoor play area of approximately 5,730 square feet. This is the primary entrance on 164th Place and the secondary egress. The center serves up to 100 children under a license from the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and the children may attend this facility from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. Services provided to the children are similar to those that we've discussed previously and include a meal service, breakfast, lunch, and daily snack, supervised playtime, and education using the creative curriculum. The center is operated by 23 professional, paraprofessional, and support staff. The first floor contains 9 classrooms, as well as administrative offices, and a commercial-grade kitchen, which is shown here. All space used for daycare programming is located on the first floor. The cellar space is used only for storage for the All My Children daycare facilities, and it is in need of repair, but the scope of work outlines improvements to the cellar. But again, the space is not used for any kind of daily programming activity for the children. All of that space is contained on the first floor. The rooftop play area consists again of approximately 6,500 square feet. Department of City Planning staff toured this facility on September 20th with ACS and daycare program staff and confirmed that aside from the repairs needed to the cellar, the remainder of the facility, including all programming space for childcare activities, are in a state of good repair. And again, to facilitate the continued operation of this daycare facility, the applicants seek acquisition of this existing privately owned building. Thank you.
So we have now seen another where it is not in a state of good repair, but again, it is the basement which is used for storage, and those problems will be addressed through the scope of work. Comments? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
I guess I just have an interpretive question, because this one has quite an extensive scope of work. New roof, new HVAC, new windows. So when you visit and characterize current conditions in being in a state of good repair, how do we match that up with obviously a number of these things are no longer or they're in need of replacement. Does that mean they're not in good repair? How do you draw the line between, when you tell us it's in a state of good repair, how do we match that up with this scope of work?
Sure. So I'll go back to this is somewhat representative.
And that's not to impugn your judgment, but just understand how you sort these things.
Sure. So when city planning tours the site, it's always with an ACS architect. So our primary responsibility is to ensure that it looks like it is functioning and is not hazardous in any kind of way. So go back to your point, Commissioner Cerullo, about if there was a broken window, we would very clearly be able to see that and note that it is not in a state of good repair. The same would be true for something like a roof leak. If the roof were actively leaking and we saw fresh stains on all of the ceiling tiles on the floors, we would see that the whole building is leaking and say something similar to that. This scope of work is more extensive than the one we saw for the previous one. A large portion of that is related to work that certainly needs to be done for the cellar space, but can be done for the whole building. For example, the scope of work outlines the replacement of all the ceiling tiles. It also talks about replacement of the classroom sink facilities. These were particularly in need of repair in the cellar space. So the cellar space is fitted with some spaces that could have been used for classrooms, but are no longer quite as they are working on the first floor. So again, our primary responsibility is just to make sure that it seems to be operable and safe from any hazardous conditions, but it's not to say that the scope would not pick up additional things that need to be done, for example, for structural or interior work. And that's what the ACS architect is on site with us to ensure.
Thank you.
I'd also note the issue of end of life, end of useful life of a roof. You can have a roof on your home that's working fine, but you know it's been enough years that it's time to replace it. Other questions? Okay, then this application is certified.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to item number 6, page 131, a non-ULURP pre-hearing for a zoning text amendment affecting an area in Manhattan Community District 6. Our presenter is Bob Tuttle of the Manhattan office.
And I'll note that Commissioner Cerullo is recused.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is an application by the East River 50s Alliance with co-applicants Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, New York City Council members Ben Kalos and Dan Garodnick, and New York State Senator Liz Krueger. This application is returning for a public hearing following referral on October 2nd. Borough President Brewer and Community Board 6 have waived their public review periods. The applicants seek approval of a text amendment to establish tower and a base regulations on 10 tax blocks in an R10 district located in the East River 50s Sutton Place neighborhood in Community District 6, and that's shown here in red. The proposed text amendment would maintain existing base and maximum allowable FAR and existing permitted uses. The primary change would be to expand the applicability of tower on a base bulk regulations. Now, these regulations currently apply on wide streets in the R10 district, and the proposed text amendment would apply a modified version of these regulations to the narrow streets in this area. The applicant's intent for these rule changes is to more closely align future development with the existing built environment while still accommodating reasonable growth. Since this proposal was recently presented to the Commission, I will not elaborate fully on these proposed text changes. However, I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of the presentation. Yeah, it is important to note that the properties along First Avenue are currently subject to tower on a base regulations since First Avenue is a wide street. The boundary within this application has been modified from the boundary in the applicant's withdrawn application, which is shown here in the blue dash line, in part to provide clarity for development sites that have frontage on First Avenue and a side street. The proposed text is written to make it clear how tower on a base rules for wide streets and those on narrow streets work in tandem. The rules for sites on First Avenue have not been changed as part of this proposal. Yeah, I'd like to take a moment to correct a statement that was made during the referral of this application. Commissioner Levin asked a question regarding the redevelopment options for potential development site 3, which is in the reasonable worst case development scenario for the withdrawn application. In response to that question, I incorrectly stated that this site, which is shown here in purple, would be able to redevelop pursuant to existing quality housing regulations. The Quality Housing Program rules state that developments or enlargements on zoning lots with existing buildings that contain residences are only permitted to use the quality housing regulations if all existing buildings on the zoning lot comply with the zoning district's quality housing bulk and FAR. This is not the case for Site 3, since the zoning lot includes the tower, just shown here along First Avenue, which exceeds multiple quality housing regulations, such as base and building height. This site would maintain the option to redevelop according to sky exposure plane rules. I apologize for the incorrect information. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yes, Commissioner Levin.
So I have a question about that last sentence.
Yes.
And the ability to develop pursuant to sky exposure plane rules. I thought that what we're doing, what is proposed in this text amendment would eliminate the sky exposure plane rules on the side streets and require tower on a base.
It would remove the tower option, which does not have to apply or comply with sky exposure plane rules. So instead of the tower rules, it would have the tower on a base rules. And so tower rules also have a minimum tower coverage, but they allow the tower to rise sheer as long as it's set back a certain amount from the street. Depends on the makeup of that lot. But we're just removing the rules for a straight tower, standard tower, replacing those with tower and a base. Quality housing still exists and sky exposure planes still exist. But in this case, quality housing would not be able to be used on this lot because of the site.
Because of the pre-existing tower on First Avenue.
First
That's
Avenue.
part of the zoning.
It's part of the zoning lot.
Okay, so what is the shape of, so if a building were to be developed here pursuant to sky sky, I guess that's what we're talking about here, right?
Yes.
How tall would an as-of-right building be under the sky exposure plane rules? I realize that's hard to answer because you have to configure the site and whatnot, but.
Yes, thank you for saying that.
What kind of height are we talking about roughly?
We did not mass this building because the rules don't change. And by that, I should say that the applicant did not mass this building in their current application because none of the rules change. And so their no action and their with action remain the same. So I can't tell you what the height could achieve, but standard tower rules in this area would begin at 85 feet, and the slope would either be 2.7 to 1 or 3.7 to 1, depending on if they use the basic or alternative front setback rules. But again, we did not mask this, the applicant did not mask
Okay,
this because
okay.
the rules did not change.
Well, that's helpful to, focus us on the fact that the sky exposure plane rules would remain, and that what we're undoing here is simply the straight-up
Standard tower.
standard tower, which, is some progress, but, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Okay, so this will go to a public hearing on Wednesday, the 18th of October.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on, item number 7 is a proposed rule change precipitated by the Special West Chelsea District. There's not anything in the briefing package, but there was a memo in your package the weekend. Here to explain the rule changes are Annie White and John Mangan of the Manhattan office and counsel's office respectively.
Thanks. Hello, good afternoon, commissioners. I'm here with John Mangan from Council's office to present the proposed rule to create a West Chelsea Affordable Housing Fund pursuant to Section 93-262 of the zoning resolution. So for some background on this, as part of the 2005 rezoning of West Chelsea, the Highline Transfer Corridor was defined to allow owners of property under and near the Highline to transfer their floor area to receiving sites in designated subareas of the Special West Chelsea District. This provision was to ensure the protection and redevelopment of the Highline by allowing landowners to still gain value from their land and to preserve open space and view corridors from the Highline. So the subarea of the Highline Transfer Corridor, which I've outlined on the map on the right in red, extends the length of the Highline and is generally bound by the eastern edge of the Highline structure and then extending 100 feet to the west. In certain sub-areas, which I've outlined here in the blue shaded area, the maximum floor area can be increased to a maximum permitted floor area either entirely through transfers from the Highline Transfer Corridor or through a combination of the Highline transfers and inclusionary housing bonus. So the Special West Chelsea zoning provides that where the chair of the City Planning Commission has determined that 90% of the floor area eligible for transfer in the Highline Transfer Corridor has been transferred, the chair shall allow by certification a contribution into the West Chelsea Affordable Housing Fund in lieu of the Highline Transfer Corridor transfers. After this determination, transfers from the Highline Transfer Corridor are still allowed, but so that option doesn't go away, but the maximum permitted floor area in the designated subareas could be achieved entirely through contributions to the Affordable Housing Fund in most of the subareas, in addition to inclusionary housing. So on September 7th of this year, Chair Lago issued a determination that more than 90% of the floor area of the Highline Transfer Corridor eligible for transfer has now in fact been transferred. Upon this determination, Department of City Planning has begun working with HPD on a rulemaking process to establish this fund, and John will explain more details about this fund now.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. In implementing the West Chelsea Affordable Housing Fund, the Commission's first order of business is to set the contribution amount. Section 98-262C of the zoning resolution reads, such contribution amount by square foot of floor area increase shall be determined by the Commission by rule and may be adjusted by rule not more than once per year. This mechanism was created by City Council through a council modification to the Special West Chelsea District as approved by the Commission in 2005. At that time, the previous mayoral administration entered into a points of agreement with City Council that stipulated the contribution rate for the West Chelsea Affordable Housing Fund, when set, would be comparable to the value of Highline Transfer Corridor development rights. The department analyzed the price per square foot of all arm's length transactions over the past 5 years and determined that the median price for these transactions is very close to $500 per square foot. So the proposed rule sets the contribution rate at $500 per square foot of floor area increase. As you saw on a previous slide, the fund would be administered by HPD and HDC to support the production and preservation of affordable housing in Manhattan Community District 4. So the CAPA process. The rulemaking process is governed by the City Administrative Procedure Act, or CAPA. If the commission assents to publication of the proposed rule today, the proposed rule, the process would unfold as follows. The department will have the proposed rule published in the city record the week of October 23rd. That's next week. The public hearing under CAPA could take place 30 days after publication. So that would set the public hearing date for the November 29th public meeting of the commission. The commission under CAPA could vote on the proposed rule 30 days after that. So we would propose to set the vote on January 3rd, 2018 public meeting. If approved, at that meeting, the department would publish the final rule the week of January 9th, 2018, and the rule would take effect 30 days after that in mid-February. So the immediate next step for the process is for the commission to assent to publication of the proposed rule in the city record. And Annie and I are happy to take any questions that you might have.
Yes, Commissioner Delos.
First, I really have to give it to Community Board 4. They really laid the groundwork for this, and here we are, many years later. So I just want to maybe unpack a little bit of what you said about, in the points of agreement for the rezoning, that comparable value was what was discussed. And so why is median value the choice as opposed to average value, and how is average different than median in this case?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm going to try to recall my knowledge through statistics class that I took many years ago. But the data set that we were looking at, which was pulled from our own records of the Highline Transfer Corridors and then Department of Finance data, because in fact these are private transactions, the city previous to now didn't have any purview over the amount. So when we pulled that data, we saw that the cost per square foot of these private transactions widely varied. And although they generally increased from the time of their origination to now, there were a lot of outliers, and there's very wide discrepancies because, there's just a lot of other factors that go into private transactions. As maybe someone was really just eager to get the land off their hands, and so they sold it at a lower price. And so we wanted to take a kind of broader look at all of the transactions that had happened, and we felt that the median was better because it eliminated some of the extreme outliers and was a more true look at kind of a fair value. But to be honest, I think for this, I can double check this, but I think for the window that we were looking at, the way that the numbers went out, I think the median and the mean were within like $10 of each other. So it came down to a similar amount, and I think the median is just the standard that we tend to use for these.
Okay. I've got another one if I could. Wait, where did my question go? I guess right now there's no timing by which the money should be used within the community district. And I'm just wondering if there was thought to, if it wasn't used within a certain time, that it would then be made available outside of the community district?
HPD's position on this generally is that there are always opportunities to use such funds. And given that the zoning text restricts it for use within Community District 4, I don't think that anything we could do in the rule could permit the funds to be used outside of Community District 4.
Also, to your comment on Community Board 4, I don't see them letting the money lie fallow, which is a good thing. Commissioner Efron.
That's actually sort of my question. Is there a reporting requirement back to Community Board 4 by HPD about the use of the funds on any regular basis?
There's nothing in the zoning text and nothing in the proposed rule that would create a reporting requirement for HPD or HDC back to Community Board 4.
Is the information public?
I'd have to get back to you on that. I believe the answer is yes, but I'd like to be able to tell you specifically in what form that would be public.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Will this be referred to the community board and local electeds and other stakeholders who might care?
Yes, as part of the CAPA process, as soon as I send a request to publish in the city record, I'll send notice to every community board, the affected council member, the press, et cetera, to make sure that as many eyes as possible are on the CAPA process. But we would, of course, make a specific note of the proposed rule for CB4, which is already aware of it, the council member whose staff we talked to last week, and other affected entities.
Yeah. Well, and then to my colleagues' observations and questions, I think we can count on Board 4 to remember where the money is and figure out how to use it pronto.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Then I'll ask for an assent by show of hands to publish a notice of these rules. Great, so assented.
Moving on, item number 8 is a city council modification for 1675 Westchester Avenue. James Moralia of the Bronx office is here to answer any questions.
Any questions on this council mod? Okay, then assent by a show of hands to send a letter to the city council telling them that the proposed mod is within scope. Okay?
Okay. Item number 9 is a city council modification for the Lower Concourse North rezoning. Again, James Moralia of the Bronx office is here to answer any questions.
Questions on this one? Okay, then we know the drill. Assent by a show of hands to send a letter to the council that the proposed modification is within scope. Okay, assented. Thank you, James.
Okay. In addition to the hearing on Wednesday, October 18th, 2017, city planning staff have prepared favorable resolutions for the following items. 1965 Lafayette Avenue zoning map and zoning text amendments in the Soundview neighborhood in the Bronx. 1776 Eastchester Road zoning map and text amendments and special permit in the Bronx. The National Black Theater zoning map and text amendments and special permit in Harlem, Manhattan. The New York Public Library Stephen A. Schwartzman Building, a landmark designation in Midtown Manhattan. The following items on Staten Island are scheduled for a decision on Wednesday. 146 Sprague Avenue, a City Planning Commission certification for future subdivision. 2830, 3234 Bamberger Lane, also a certification for future subdivision. 131 Rathbun Avenue, a City Planning Commission certification for future subdivision. 7088 Amboy Road is being laid over. 57 Canton Avenue, also a certification for future subdivision. And finally, 41 and 43 Ramblewood Avenue, a city planning certification for future subdivision. We're going to take a little bit of a detour out of order, moving on to November 1st. For discussion today, a city-sponsored self-storage text amendment, which is tentatively scheduled for November 1st. Amanda Iyer for Housing, Economic, and Infrastructure Planning Division is here to present.
And I would note the reason for taking it out of order is that Amanda and her team have to be out in the community, and so we want to give them time on the subway. I also want to thank the commission. This was a process where we learned so much from the commission's questioning, from the testimony at the public hearing. After the public hearing, we actually went out with another round of engagement with the full gamut of stakeholders. And so the proposal that is before you reflects both the pithy questions posed by the commissioners and what we heard at the public hearing and subsequently.
Thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Amanda Iyer. So I'm here to follow up on the public hearing that was held on August 23rd. When we heard many comments on the proposed zoning text amendment to impose new restrictions for new self-storage facilities in IBZs, the industrial business zones. I will briefly delve into the background of the proposal just to remind us, all of us, why we are here today and what we are trying to achieve. The proposal originated in the 10-point industrial action plan, which was announced almost exactly 2 years ago by Mayor de Blasio and the City Council. And the 10-point industrial action plan targets New York City's industrial business zones, the IBZs, as I will call them from now, as areas for employment growth and industrial innovation. The industrial action plan specifically called out limiting personal storage in IBZs to support economic growth for industrial businesses in these areas. The unregulated development of self-storage detracts from the city's long-term goals for these areas for three principal reasons. Firstly, self-storage doesn't generate many jobs. Secondly, it primarily serves households. And finally, it tends to occupy very large lots along truck routes or highways, and these are the kinds of sites that would typically be optimal for industrial businesses that are more job-intensive. So for this reason, in May of 2017, we referred out a proposal that would require a City Planning Commission special permit for all new self-storage facilities in IBZs. And I'll quickly recap again what kind of feedback we received from community boards. So overall, the proposal was largely supported by community boards. 14 community boards voted in favor of the original proposal. It was also supported by industrial advocacy groups, and the Brooklyn Borough President was also supportive, although with modifications, and those modifications proposed by the Brooklyn Borough President are very close to our A text, actually. Then the original proposal was opposed by 4 community boards, the New York Self-Storage Association and generally industry representatives, and the Chambers of Commerce of Brooklyn, for sure. I would also just like to highlight that 9 community boards, which is about 1/3 of the which is exactly 1/3 of the community boards who received the proposal, did not decide to issue any recommendations, and also 3 borough presidents didn't issue any recommendations. So among certain constituencies, this proposal was very well supported, and we received a few criticisms still, and these were the criticisms we received from supporters of the proposal were largely that the restriction of self-storage shouldn't only apply to IBZs, but also to other M districts. And this was partially in response to concern that this proposal could result in a shift of self-storage to other areas, and so in order to avoid a shift, we should just impose the restriction everywhere. And we also heard from supporters of the proposal that the restriction, not all supporters, but some of them, that the restriction shouldn't only apply to self-storage, but also other uses such as hotels and nightlife that are permitted in M districts. Then from parties that opposed the original application, we received other types of comments. We heard in general that the findings were vague and that they were open to multiple interpretations and so problematic just to administer and apply for. We heard that the proposal would hurt the self-storage industry and also the small businesses and households that it serves. We heard that the restriction of self-storage would not in itself result in the creation of industrial space, and so the restriction on self-storage wouldn't necessarily lead to growth in industrial employment. We heard that because of the enactment of the special permit, there may be a shift in self-storage facilities away from the IBZs and more towards M and C8 areas where self-storage would still be permitted. And finally, because often self-storage is sited on contaminated sites or redevelops, repurposes old buildings, we heard that the special permit would curb or would lower the amount of redevelopment of contaminated sites and old buildings that we are currently seeing or have seen in the past. So in response to some of the concerns that I just explained, so among these were also concerns expressed by the City Planning Commission at the time of referral, especially regarding the findings of the proposed City Planning Commission special permit and the results of the DEIS, which acknowledged the potential for significant impact on the self-storage industry. The Department of City Planning filed an amended application, which I'm calling an A-text, and this amended application was filed early August, basically as another policy option for the Commission to consider. The A-text, as we filed it, would permit self-storage facilities as of right in the IBZs, provided that at least 20,000 square feet of ground floor space be dedicated to manufacturing, industrial, and semi-industrial uses. We also changed the originally proposed CPC special permit so that it would apply only to modify or waive the industrial ground floor requirement. So only if this industrial requirement were not to be fulfilled, an applicant would come in seeking a special permit. And as you certainly remember, we received fairly divided public comment on the A text. I will begin with comments we received from constituents who were in favor of the original proposal and against the A text. So their biggest concern, or they said many of them, but their biggest concerns related to the fact that the A text presents a major departure from the original text, and that it doesn't send as strong of a message to self-storage operators, because in their view, these facilities shouldn't at all be located in IBZs. We also heard that the A text didn't include any enforcement mechanisms to ensure the perpetuity or the affordability of the required industrial space. So these are the criticisms we received from constituents who favored the original proposal, City Planning Commission special permit in all cases. And then from the storage industry, we're good, yeah. From the storage industry, as well as from the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce, we generally heard that the A text was a step in the right direction, but needed additional refinement in order to be workable. We heard that the A text was a one-size-fits-all approach, that the industrial space requirement was a fixed amount and should instead be a ratio because the fixed amount wasn't workable in all sites. We heard that there should be flexibility in terms of where the required industrial space would be provided. The A text said it would have to be on the ground floor. We heard that the proposal presented hardship for small sites because, in effect, only sites that had the ability to put 20,000 square feet of industrial space on the ground floor could even apply for or have an as-of-right option. So sites at 20,000 square feet or even 25,000 square feet couldn't have an as-of-right option. The A text exempted a certain amount of floor area in M11 districts, which are the 1 FAR districts, and we heard that this wasn't sufficient and it was also needed in other zoning districts, not just the M11. And finally, we heard more criticism regarding the findings of the proposed special permit and how those were open to multiple interpretations and too vague to really see much of a future. This is why we're here today. So we are coming back, and we would like to propose some additional modifications to the A text based on everything we heard for the commission to consider. With the modifications that we are recommending, the proposal would go as follows. So we're proposing that there should be an as-of-right option, and that would, we're distinguishing between large lots and small lots. Large lots, and those are all lots larger than 25,000 square feet, would require a new self-storage facility to include an industrial floor space component amounting to 50% of the lot area. So if I had a 40,000 square foot lot, the industrial requirement would be 20,000 square feet, half of the lot area. Then regarding that required industrial space, we're proposing that half of it would have to be located on the ground floor, and the other half could be located on the second story or in the cellar, so that any space that was provided not on the ground floor would have to benefit from direct access to the industrial space on the ground floor, and also would have to benefit from access to freight elevators and loading berths. So if this means that I have a 40,000 square foot lot, of which I have to provide 20,000 square feet in industrial space, 10,000 of that would have to be on the ground floor, and the other 10,000 could be on other floors, so either on the second story or in the cellar. We're also proposing that the industrial space would be dedicated to manufacturing, semi-industrial, and industrial uses, art, photo, and motion picture production studios. This is the same use group list that we had proposed for the A text as you heard at the public hearing. We're also proposing some considerations for small lots, and small lots are defined as lots of smaller than 25,000 square feet. Of course, on small lots, you could also opt to follow the same rules as we've expressed for large lots, but because that in some instances would presumably be quite difficult to provide, we're also including another option for small lots, and that would be that a big portion of large self-storage units would have to be within self-storage facilities in these areas. So large self-storage units are typically rented by businesses. We've heard that quite extensively in testimony. And so we're saying that if 50% of the lot area in such a self-storage unit is provided in the form of large units, we are still serving largely businesses for this floor area, and so we could be achieving our objectives. A large self-storage unit is considered a unit of 100 square feet or more. That's a relatively typical industry standard. We also heard concerns of the Commission regarding the proposed findings to modify or waive the industrial requirement. And in considering the concerns, we recognize that the issue was basically about financial hardship, whether or not including the industrial space can bring a property owner a reasonable return or not. And so understanding this, we're now proposing to modify the A text so that the proposed special permit is not a City Planning Commission special permit, but a BSA special permit. And so the BSA would need to find in granting relief from the industrial floor requirement. In granting relief, the BSA would need to find that this industrial floor requirement creates financial hardship with no reasonable possibility that a self-storage facility with the required industrial floor area could bring a reasonable return. And the BSA would seek to lower those, the industrial floor space requirement to the minimum extent possible. So these are overall the modifications to the A text that we would like to propose, and we're also proposing to retain several elements in the A text. These are the list of the permitted uses in the industrial space. We're also proposing to not change the allowance of up to 20,000 square feet of the required industrial floor area to exceed the one FAR cap in M11 districts. We would maintain the specifications for ceiling heights of the industrial floor space, which would have to amount to 15 feet. And we're also proposing to reduce the off-street parking and the loading dock requirements, just as we had done for the A text, because this would facilitate the co-location of the two uses in a mixed-use building. We think this proposal and these modifications have several benefits. For one, the findings relate to financial feasibility, which means that the findings better match the issues at hand, and this falls under the expertise of the Board of Standards and Appeals. So that is one of the modifications that we think is beneficial to the overall implementation of the proposal. Furthermore, the industrial space requirement is a ratio, and it's not a fixed requirement. The ratio means that we can, on large lots, maximize the amount of industrial space that's provided, but also make sure that on smaller lots, the industrial space could still be an option. And really, if we look at typical self-storage lots, which are generally between 25,000 and 90,000 square feet in size, we could really be creating meaningful amounts of industrial space. So the industrial set-aside could measure between 12,500 and 45,000 square feet on each lot where a self-storage facility gets developed. We're also considering a small sites alternative here, which is responsive to the fact that small businesses use self-storage. Then we are also allowing that the industrial floor space is permitted on other stories, and this would provide generally more flexibility, which allows both uses to function on the ground floor. We know that self-storage also has loading needs, has lobby, needs the ground floor, as well as the industrial space. We heard that industrial businesses, some of them can function on other floors, and overall allowing for this flexibility increases the feasibility for a self-storage developer to actually build such a mixed-use building, and it can, in some cases, also improve the affordability of the space for industrial businesses who don't necessarily want to be paying the rents of the ground floor, but could perhaps well work in the cellar or the second floor. Finally, with these modifications, and actually these modifications don't do anything about it, but we think that the relatively wide range of uses that would be permitted in the industrial floor space would actually facilitate the ability to find a tenant for a self-storage operator, and we think that's quite important. This was really it in terms of the presentations. These are all of the modifications that we would like to present to the Commission, and I'm happy to answer any questions as far as I am able.
Yes, Commissioner Arfon.
I just want to commend everybody for the flexibility and the responsiveness to the public hearing comments and other things. I do have a few questions. It seems to me it would be important that the industrial space use on the ground floor in particular isn't for the storage of vehicles in connection with an industrial business. That's one area. Secondly, is the text silent on hotel use in IBZs?
We actually just certified a hotel special permit.
Oh, that's right, I did see it. I knew it was in the back of my mind somewhere, I just couldn't remember
Oh,
where.
I'm sorry, it was the scope, it was the,
Right,
it was the
memo.
scoping.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And I think that the second or contiguous space for manufacturing is a really good and positive change, but then it's incumbent upon the EDC to really keep track of the market to make sure that the hardship provision by BSA is actually in fact a hardship. So I would hope that there would be data collection about market rates and vacancies and other things in the IBZs in a more rigorous way than there has been.
Commissioner Delos.
So Amanda, I wanted to ask a question about the proposal on the BSA special permit. So that the idea that an applicant would be able to go to BSA to modify or waive, that's obviously just for the large sites, not considering, it's the small sites that would be providing 50% of 100 square foot or more in spaces. It's really applying to just the large sites, or is it contemplated to apply to
It would also
both?
apply to the small sites, so any facility that thought that this rule was not implementable, that the regulations were too harsh, could still go to the BSA.
Okay. And just to follow up, I guess, on Commissioner Efron's point about reasonable return and what's the benchmark for reasonable return, and is it industrial use as the benchmark and not a storage facility use as the benchmark? So that, I think, would be helpful to be very clear on. I think the issue, I think, still with the ATEX is the lack of enforcement on any of the provisions. And I think that's a glaring omission.
Yeah, if I can speak to that just briefly. So we all know the Department of Buildings enforces use restrictions and in M zones, and we don't think that these are different, really. Issues that constituents are concerned about here are really the same for every use and every building in IBZs, and giving special treatment here just triggers many other questions. But beyond that, we know that there are IBZ service providers, and they are hired by the city, and they provide additional eyes on the ground with knowledge of local conditions. And the number of self-storage facilities that would be built under this mixed-use proposal, including the required industrial space, would certainly be relatively modest. Even today, the number of self-storage facilities that are being built don't exceed more than 10 a year. So considering that this mixed-use requirement is an additional hurdle, we would probably see fewer facilities than that get built every year. And so those facilities would be quite easily identified and publicly accessible. And given that we have the IBC service providers in these areas, we think that could help with the enforcement issue.
If I may, I mean, I appreciate that it's a complicated thing to try to address, but I think the IBC service providers aren't currently contracted to do what you're asking, and they're constantly advocating and fighting for resources, honestly, to do the things that they're already supposed to be doing. So I think for them to also then become the police for DOB is unrealistic. I think the other piece, and this is really to kind of like avoid a future situation like what we see now with the M zones in Soho, like it all revolves around market, like, you know, and the fact that in order to really have true industrial uses, you have to have a price point that ultimately is going to support that use. And if we're serious about this, then we have to have a mechanism that ensures that there's a stewardship of those spaces so that we can retain, to attract and then retain those industrial uses. And that's what's missing.
Yes, Commissioner Cirillo.
Well, I too just want to acknowledge the work that was done on this, the modifications to the A text. But I do have a couple of questions, and I hope, given the reason we're even contemplating all of this is because we recognize the importance of the IBZ and throughout the city. So I don't want my questions to be inferred in any way that I am not recognizing the significance of IBZs in the neighborhood, but I am still trying to get sort of to the bottom of some of what we're proposing and how we got there. So I guess the first sort of, the global question on this has to do with the size of the lots. And I'm trying to find my notes from the public hearing, which, the stack on this is this big now. But when my recollection was that in answer to a question or during one of the presentations, the number, maybe it was 60,000 square feet, was sort of the sort of the average size of a lot, and for self-storage facilities. And I leave room for not being correct on that. But when you look at the averages we're working with, it's not that off. 50, it certainly was greater than 50. So, and I know that the intent behind this was to sort of ensure that large sites did not become, particularly in IBZ areas, did not just become self-storage homes. And so I guess with that sense of this, I wonder why we've chosen 25,000 and are considering anything above 25,000 a large site. That doesn't sound like a large site to me, but how is the 25,000 the threshold between a large and a small site, which then triggers all of the other things, whether for as of right or for a special permit? I just wonder how we got there when it seemed to me that at least greater than 50 was sort of the average size or most, I don't remember what the terminology was, for sites to build self-storage facilities. Because we get into, once you get to the 25,000 and then the 50%, what are we really doing? Are we really making it nearly impossible to do that kind of business here? And if that's the intent, well, then that's the intent. But if it isn't, how have we contemplated the implication on the numbers we're using now as the formula?
Yeah. So that what you described, making it impossible for self-storage to be in New York City, that is not the intent of the action. To maybe point out the obvious, but for the 25,000 square feet threshold, there were a few different ways that feel like all brought us to Rome or to that point, basically.
Right.
But there were a few. So one was looking from the point of a self-storage facility, a 25,000 square foot lot is perhaps not that big, but it is true that from the point of many other industrial businesses, a lot of 25,000 square feet is already a very substantial site. Mm-hmm. So this is coming from the other side, coming to the issue from another side. Then 25,000 square feet was about the lot threshold where a substantial set aside on the ground floor was feasible, considering loading berths and lobbies, and so 25,000 square feet and parking requirements should quite comfortably enable both uses to occupy the ground floor. And also looking at the size of lots of self-storage facilities, 25,000 was, so you were talking about averages before, 25,000 was the lowest quartile, so a quarter of self-storage facilities are built on 25,000, on lots smaller than 25,000 square feet, and 3/4 on larger lots. So that was another determination to propose that threshold as the small sites threshold.
Okay, and when you link that to the requirement that half of that space, the options, right? There's the options here. The 50% set aside for larger units, just to get into that. What are we trying to accomplish there if we are permitting the use, and this was all about use, why are we then limiting, I'll use the term limiting, the size of the use we are now creating the sort of framework on? What are we gaining if this was all about use in an IBZ? The use is the same. So then why are we getting deeper into that and saying, and if you're going to do this use we're permitting you to do, you could only do it at this size? What?
And this is, I think, mainly something that is in response to what we heard during the public process and how many businesses use self-storage and the fact that we should have different considerations
Right.
for small sites. And so having a threshold or a requirement for self-storage units of a certain size struck us as a compromise, sort of balancing a bit of different requirements that would make self-storage still feasible on small lots, while for us still ensuring that it does at least serve largely businesses, which, I mean, we have heard apparently they already do.
Yes.
And 50% might set that bar a little bit higher because we heard that about 30% of the customers were businesses. So you know, IBZs as employment generating places could still have self-storage and that at least the units would be serving businesses to a larger extent than before.
No, and
If I could elaborate on that, one of the major concerns that led to the industrial job plan and the initial support, strong support from the city council for regulating self-storages in IBZs was that they are very low job generators. The industry informed us in a very helpful way that a significant number, although their statistics were a little bit soft, went to or were being used by other small businesses. And so that struck us as very different consideration, that allowing small businesses to thrive by giving them access to self-storage units that they would use on a daily basis for their equipment, very different than very low job generating residential self-storage units. And so in the questioning, I'm struck by the fact that even among the commission, the questions show the challenge that we faced in coming up with a proposal. I know that after Greater East Midtown, Deputy Mayor Glenn commented that if a bunch of folks on different sides of the issues were all 20% unhappy, we were probably doing something right. I don't know if on this people are at a 20% level or a higher percentage level unhappy on many different sides, but what you see in the proposal and in your questioning is that tension, that balancing of different interests.
Absolutely, and I, like I said, I appreciate the responses, and I'm just trying to get this in the way that I believe it's intended to be, although certainly I still have questions about this, and I have one final one, which is, I don't even know if there's really an answer to this, and I can't take credit for the question, but I will take credit for the question right now. But the original question was posed by Commissioner Levin at the public hearing, which I thought was sort of a really interesting and typically brilliant question from Commissioner Levin.
I'm glad you're asking because I can't remember.
And I'm linking it to a statistic that was provided by the industry, I believe, at the hearing, that close to 80% of self-storage facilities are owned and managed by mom and pop, they're mom and pop style. And I remember Commissioner Levin asking a question about how this kind of a proposal turns the owner of such a facility into a landlord, which they may not have any experience. And I don't want to diminish the fact that these are business people and have skills that hopefully are successful and appropriate and effective for business. but there is a landlord element to this, and the requirements on what they would need to do to find the tenants and then manage the tenants. And I just wondered if there was, what the consideration was or what thought process we followed in pursuing this, and if anything came out of it from the public hearing, which I would not be aware of, obviously.
So we'd have to look into the details of that statistic for New York City, but I'm pretty sure that is not a New York City statistic, but maybe New York
Okay.
State or nationwide.
And I could be wrong in my
But there
restatement
are
of it, but
mom and
I
pop
have the note
self-storage.
written, so I wrote something that relates to that. But
There
I
are mom
don't
and
know
pop
if-
operators in New York City. I don't think it's
Corporation.
80%. But then, I mean, I think, yes, it does require a certain level of sophistication, and we are thinking that, you know, ideally, and we're hoping that these developments would include people who would like to work with the city, who would like to work with the service providers. We wouldn't, you know, include provisions that would preclude ownership arrangements for that space. So we are hoping that the owners and operators of these spaces would seek partnerships that would make this space feasible. But I'm not sure that addresses your entire question.
Well, it does in part. When I began the question, I wasn't sure there was really an easy answer to the question anyway, but you gave it a good shot, and I respect that. I really do, so thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Efron.
Is it possible that the answer is that the difference between leasing industrial space and leasing office space is that it's almost always triple net leased, and that very often the landlord of those facilities is not present on site in any possible way?
That was a good shot, too. I respect that one as well.
It's still a different business.
It's a different
Yes.
business.
We get the sense that Commissioner Efron knows a thing or
She
two
knows
about
what
leasing
she's
industrial space.
I mean, and sorry, to follow up, we did hear at the public hearing that not every self-storage owner or developer would be able to fill that requirement, and we are aware, and that is probably the case. We have heard from the self-storage industry that these modifications are very tough and still too difficult for them to actually realize. Of course, they are aggressively advocating against restrictions, but to your point, also the modifications haven't found much love out there.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
So I had just a couple quick questions regarding the calculation of area that's used for storage. For instance, in the small lots, when you say 50% of lot area is in the form of large storage units, are we including circulation in that, or are we just including the footprint of the boxes themselves?
So we have drafted a zoning text
Yeah.
that we think could reflect all of these modifications, and the way we have explicitly said that shared spaces, common spaces, such as hallways and freight elevators,
Got it.
wouldn't count towards that space.
Okay. And the second follow-up would be that recognizing that sometimes these things are stacked, we would, even if the footprint is, if there's two units, one on top of the other, so to speak, that would count as 200 square feet as opposed to 100 square feet, even though the footprint is only 100.
I think that's a Department of Buildings question. They have very specific ways to calculate whether something is floor area.
Well, this isn't
No,
floor area.
this is talking about what percentage needs to be dedicated, and the footprint might be 100 square feet, but you get it on two different levels, and so that goes to meeting 200.
Sometimes, yeah, that's what I'm assuming.
Exactly. So what we're proposing is that the industrial floor space requirement could be provided. Half of it would have to be on the ground floor, but the other half could be on another floor, could be on the floor above.
I'm sorry, this is
Oh, we're
the
talking about small
storage
units?
units. These are the storage units, I'm sorry.
So,
The
okay,
storage
sorry.
units, that's
So
what I
for
was,
the-
right.
for the-
From the small lot, when you have the storage units, and they have to be at least 100 feet, if they were to stack them, I'm assuming that would count as 200, as opposed to just the footprint of 100 square feet.
It depends how the Department of Buildings otherwise interprets the stacking of storage units. So sometimes I think it depends on how the stacking happens. Sometimes the stacking results in more floor area, and sometimes it's not counted as more floor area. I think it depends on the
So
stacking.
so you're
But we
talking,
should
when you
look-
say floor area, you're looking at zoning floor area.
Yeah,
being used.
and since
Okay.
the
Oh,
Department of
that's
Buildings,
interesting.
but we should, I would like to just get back to you on
Okay,
that
no, that's
question
fine.
and clarify
That's
with the
fine.
Department of Buildings. It depends on, yeah.
Yeah, no,
The
of
ceiling
course,
height,
of course,
yeah.
the ceiling, but if the ceiling height allowed for 2 units, then.
And they might
it's
count
just a
it as
question.
floor area.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Again, Department of Buildings, I will get back to you on
No,
that. Thank
thank
you.
Yes, Commissioner Levin.
So where is it proposed that this go next? Are we getting more stakeholder input on this?
Actually, we had hoped to have a decision on this, and we have tentatively scheduled November 1st, but I don't think anybody wants to rush the commission.
Yeah, what I would note is that this does not have a Euler time clock
Right.
on it, which is why we took the time following the public hearing to go out. I think at this point, we believe that we have heard from a wide array of stakeholders. We don't feel that there are other doors to knock on. We know that there are disagreements. I was actually quite struck at the public hearing that there was the original proposal and the A text, and everyone testified against the one they didn't like. No one testified in support of the one that they liked. It is a challenging proposal that's out there. I think that we at the department will want to go back and reflect on this very useful information. If commissioners would like, we can bring it back again for a subsequent discussion. But as far as further stakeholder outreach, I think we've done our homework quite thoroughly.
Well, I guess my question was whether, has the text been released so that those who care about it could scrutinize it and provide their comments? It seems to me that this is going to be very difficult to implement and for practitioners to apply for and for enforcement to take place. So now's the time to figure out that we've got the text in
So-
absolutely the correct, best possible form.
Understood. So we have a draft of the text that we have discussed in detail with the BSA and the Department of Buildings. But we haven't, because these were modifications that you were seeing today for the
Yeah,
first time, we haven't gone and released anything. Yeah.
Well, so while I certainly accept the proposition that this now reflects an attempt to address all the issues we've heard about, it would seem to me best public process to release the text publicly for a period of time before we vote on it.
If I could ask our counsel what our practice has been on this?
Because I would say, the commission hasn't even seen the text, so.
Hi. As the commission knows, our practice varies widely. I could have said that.
And you get to explain why.
There are really multiple reasons
Yeah.
why. Very frequently, it's just a matter of writing till the very last minute for complex text. We understand here the challenges of people understanding and feeling that they can negotiate through the text. So I think it is appropriate for us to release it. The amount of time that it would be out there is subject to discussion, but we can't say it's not appropriate. There is no standard here, though.
And we do have we have an engaged community concerned
On
about
all
this. And
sides.
I
think
would
we
say
can-
engaged
sides.
communities.
Yeah,
Yes,
and
on
and
all
we can
sides.
count on them to see it and respond quickly.
Yes.
I'm not
Yes.
arguing for bureaucratic delay here.
Right. So, and this is not, I think, the most complex text in terms of length or anything else, but there will be issues. So we will look at it and we will give some consideration to what we think is appropriate, but we hear you, and I think we can say that we will do it. We will release it.
And I think the text will be improved by the questioning that was here. I'm actually glad not that we didn't release it before the discussion. Yes, Commissioner Ortiz.
If that's the case, then I want to echo sort of my concerns around the hardship provisions at the BSA, and I'd like to understand how that works. It's a little bit of a black box for me, and I know this has come up with us with Soho and the M1, and I think, Commissioner Delos raised the concern that I also share, what is the threshold for determining hardship? And if that threshold is a very soft threshold, this becomes a meaningless tool, or it's just a hoop for them to jump through, but everybody does it, and, so if in coming back, I don't know if this is appropriate, but, having BSA describe how their enforcement and what is it that they look at, I'd be interested in understanding that a little bit more.
I could begin to address that. This has a financial hardship finding, and then there was a minimum variance or a minimum sort of relief finding as it was written. And the idea would be that there would be a financial analysis that uses market comparables to establish what they should have paid for the property, how much it costs to build their building, and then using market comparables, how much would they expect to get in return for that. And then they compare those things, and for a variance, it's does the project work? Is there a reasonable rate of return, which the board has sort of said is 5 to 6% return on investment. That can can be sometimes very hard, actually, for people to
And what we've seen is
show.
that, purchase prices tend to be inflated when folks have an expectation that you can get through this process fairly easily. So then, it's a cyclical thing. Now, yes, there's a hardship because they have paid.
The cost of the property would be based on market comparables, not on what they paid for the property. The BSA does not stand for the Board of Stupid Acquisitions.
Oh, so you had a ready comeback for that.
I've had a lot of practice.
I will note that turning this into a BSA special permit was a direct response to the concerns from quite a number of the commissioners that the findings that were in the original proposal were somewhat of a square peg in a round hole, where the issue that we were confronting head-on was financial hardship. And I'll also note that we have had extensive discussions with our colleagues at the BSA who are prepared, willing to take on this additional work should this zoning text be adopted. Other questions or comments? So what I'll suggest is that we will go back, we will take the input from the commissioners as all of our input on this has come from many different angles. We will then put forth a draft text publicly so that we can get what I would suggest is more fine-tuned type of input, and then bring it back to another review session before scheduling a vote on this. Thank you. Thanks, Amanda.
So while we were on it, I will say that also on November 1st, the Old St. James Episcopal Church, a landmark designation, is scheduled for decision. Moving back to October 30th, we have the Bedford Union Armory in Brooklyn scheduled for a decision. Kevin Kraft from the Brooklyn office is present to discuss the letter that was in your packet. I would also note that members of the applicant team are in the audience.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Any question? Are there?
I actually think it would be helpful, Kevin, since we've had quite a back and forth with EDC, to elaborate on the partnerships that will be entered into and the generalized lease terms with respect to below market rate lease. I think that might be helpful.
Yeah, the developer has stated that they will be offering below market rates to the nonprofits in the head house at $6 per square foot with a right of first refusal for when the lease terms are up, which lasts anywhere from 5 to 30 years.
We just got this and haven't had a chance to read it because it just sat on our desk while we were listening to other things.
Yeah.
Is that information in this EDC document?
I believe that they expressed that the rents are provided at below market rates. I don't think they specify that it's at $6 per square foot, but that was mentioned at the public hearing.
What the letter from EDC is an attempt to respond to questions that were raised at the public hearing, and specifically questions from the commissioners with respect to the nature of the community benefits that were being provided, and also the, including some of the financial aspects of it.
I think the most challenging thing about this proposal is that when the RFP was released and the community input was sought, I don't think the extreme pressures of displacement that have been going on in the community were as palpable at that moment in time as they are today. And so part of the challenge is that I believe both EDC and the developer have been put in a challenging position because the displacement pressures are real. And there's a feeling that this application doesn't address them to the extent that it should. It doesn't mean that it's not a good proposal, it just means that it doesn't necessarily meet some of the most pressing needs that the community is facing as it relates to the affordable housing. And so I think that's the greatest challenge, and I don't believe we're going to solve that at city planning. That's going to be solved through subsidy later. To make the project more deeply affordable and hopefully to put some real funds behind anti-displacement work on behalf of local residents.
We've heard that before, but I don't believe as eloquently expressed, so thank you. I'll note that the vote on this is on the 30th because that's the last day of our ULURP time clock. Yes, Commissioner Irfan.
I'm not sure I could possibly be as eloquent about that, but I am concerned about the facilities, the actual sports facilities. I know there's a reference to a membership fee of $10 to access the fitness rooms and open time at other facilities, but it's unclear if that's $10 each time, as in a movie ticket, or $10 one time for life, or $10 per year, and also how long-term that is. It's very nice that there'll be a beautiful conference room for community meetings, but I think the entire premise of this project, even as described by EDC, was that this was supposed to be a community center in the most small d democratic sense of the word, and trying to understand how that's fulfilled just seems really, really important.
Yeah, well, as part of the ground lease, the developers are required to provide up to $500,000 in community benefits, and then they're incentivized to provide additional community benefits and subsidies up to $1.5 million, and they'll get a rent credit back for that. So they're incentivized by EDC to subsidize some of those services.
But as I think I mentioned even in the hearing, that can disappear very, very quickly if you're talking about expensive sports facilities that have high-priced attendance. You can lose $500,000 in subsidies in a very short period of time. So the real question is, who is going to set the program for making sure that this is really the most accessible community sports facility?
Kevin can explain also, it's $10 per month. Is the admission fee for all the facilities except for the swimming pool?
Except for the swimming pool.
Right. And the way that this works is, we still need to get back to you on your question exactly, what happens in the future. But as Kevin explained, there's to the extent that they reduce the fees charged by the nonprofits that are operating the facility to the public, they receive Bedford Courts receives a credit to their lease. So it's part of the lease agreement, right? That they get a back payment after, or credit, I should say, after they report all benefits that they receive.
But to be really cynical about that, you can create a very expensive sports facility that then you say costs I'm really making this up, $1,000 an hour, and you eat away at that 500,000 very quickly in exchange. And I'm not saying that these operators would do that, but this is really something the public is entrusting us to make sure is clearly for the public. And I guess the reputation of the project as being less about affordable housing than the community thought, in my opinion, requires us to actually be more as specific as we possibly can about what will be available to the public in terms of the recreational facilities.
We can look into it further, but we do have EDC, or the city represented through EDC, that has negotiated this lease, that has an independent auditor that is looking at the lease and, not the lease, but the payments each year and the receipts that the developer will be submitting in order for reimbursement, right, that they're doing the right thing. And to, I mean, it would mean that the city would have to sign off. It would also mean that Canva, which is a non-for-profit that is community-oriented, would be
Sign off as well.
would have to sign off, and really would be not operating in good faith if that in fact were the case, that they would be doing that.
I know them well. I know they'd act in good faith. I'm just saying the difference between a gym room and a tennis court is a huge difference on a per square foot per hour basis. So I don't mean to beat this, but
Sure.
The idea is what the needs of market rate tenants, sports facilities may be different than the needs of the community. And I would just hope that there could be some place where it was really clear what the vision of this is for the community and to keep that standard through the life of the project. If it were the YMCA running this, I think I would, and not to say that they should be running it, but it would at least show me that the sports facilities were such that people understood the needs of the community.
I believe that the issue around having the WISE run it is the very targeted nature of the benefits that are being provided, and the WISE mission is broader, serving the entirety of its catchment area, whereas here, at the request of the community, very homed in on providing the subsidized access to neighborhood residents.
Well, then that's a good answer, because that means it is in fact doing that.
One other thing that I would note, your questions go to the fact that this is a unique model. This is pushing the envelope. I certainly take comfort from the fact that there's a community advisory council, and the community is very well organized around this project, and I would certainly count on them, in addition to CAMBA and to EDC, to be the eyes and ears that are making sure that this lives up to the huge potential that's there.
Fair enough.
Yes, Commissioner Levin.
You know, this is a unique and extremely complicated structure for operating a community facility, and certainly wish them all the best. And for the reasons that you explained, it is desirable that it be community-based, but they have to go out and find contractors to run the swimming program, the basketball program, all of the programming in there. And they don't have experience operating a facility at this level. So there's a lot of risk in this. If the vision is realized, it will be terrific. But we have to be sure the risk is managed.
I will note that the developer has also hired outside of Canva a manager for the facility who has experience with the Boys and Girls Club as well to work in partnership.
No, all identifying the pieces and trying to get them all there, but this is complex to put together. I don't know that
if I could just note to that point the fact that the two key anchors that have been identified are the basketball program and the swim program that have long track records. Now, any entity can go out of business, but I certainly take comfort from the fact that they are established market rate providers.
Yeah, I guess I'm not inviting any or requesting any answer on that point, but I think we have to recognize what a significant step this is. But I'd like to revert to Commissioner Delos's question. We heard a tremendous amount about the effect that the mere presence of market rate housing in this project will have on affordability in the broader neighborhood. And I think Commissioner Delos is quite right to put the spotlight on preservation efforts. Is there any news to come from the city before we vote on tenant protection measures that might be added to this program, or are we?
At this point, I'm not aware of any tenant protections that have been put in place, if there's anything we see at this point, but as of right now, I don't believe so.
Okay, so we operate using our general understanding of how gentrification is working in the city, in particular in this neighborhood, at this point.
I know, Commissioner Levin, some of the steps that have been taken citywide that are applicable to the neighborhood. One is the fact that the city council passed a right to council law. And that is, for the city, and I'd say for the nation, quite path-breaking. And then the second is the landlord ambassador program, recognizing that many of our stabilized units are in smaller buildings where the landlords themselves would benefit from assistance. And so I do think that it needs to be looked at in the context of steps that the city has already taking citywide, not just one specific to the neighborhood.
If I may.
Yes.
A recommendation, though, along those lines, to take what you just said and add to it further. There's current discussion around the certificate of no harassment pilot legislation, and right now this community board wouldn't be included under the current discussion, and I think
It would be. You said it would be?
it would not.
It would not.
Right, because it's not, this isn't an area-wide rezoning. This is a specific individual project. And it's not a building where there's current harassment, because that's not what this is about. So it's something that I think could be brought to include the community board in the pilot program.
Any other comments, questions? And we'll certainly go back to EDC with respect to some of the questions that have been posed about the project. Okay.
Okay. Moving on, we have a final, a post-hearing follow-up for the Sheltering Arms Daycare Center. If there are any questions on this application, happy to relay them back to the Bronx office. Okay, good. This concludes the public review session for the New York City Planning Commission for Monday, October 16, 2017. The time is 3:40.
Sounds very final, like never to be held again.